My name is Emily Johnson. I'm 28 years old, and I'll never forget the Christmas morning when I discovered my parents had sold the only gift that truly mattered to me. But let me back up a little, because understanding what happened requires knowing the kind of family I grew up in here in Reno, Nevada. I've always been the responsible one. The older sister who cleaned up messes, who worked part-time jobs through high school while Madison got to focus on her cheerleading and social life. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. But loving someone doesn't mean you can't see the truth about how differently you've been treated your entire life. Madison is everything I'm not. She's blonde where I'm brunette, outgoing where I'm quiet, confident where I'm cautious. At 20, she still lives at home, still gets her laundry done by mom, still has dad wrapped around her little finger. Me, I moved out at 22, got my own apartment across town, and have been supporting myself as a graphic designer ever since. The guitar came into my life 3 weeks before Christmas. My childhood best friend, Sarah Mitchell, was moving to Portland for a new job. We'd grown up together on Elm Street, spent countless summers riding bikes and sharing secrets. When she knocked on my apartment door that December evening, I could see she'd been crying. "Emily, I can't take everything with me," she said, holding a worn leather guitar case. "This was my grandmother's. She taught me to play when I was 8, and I know how much you always loved music." I remember running my fingers along the case's brass latches, feeling the weight of history in my hands. Sarah's grandmother, Mrs. Chen, had been like a third grandmother to me growing up. She used to sit on her porch in the evenings, playing folk songs while Sarah and I did homework on her steps. "Sarah, I can't accept this. It's too precious. Please," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Chen always said music should live where it's appreciated. You're the only person I trust with this." When I opened the case, the guitar was even more beautiful than I remembered. A 1967 Martin D28, with a rich, honey-colored body that seemed to glow in my apartment's lamplight. The wood had tiny scratches and wear marks that told stories of decades of loving use. When I strummed the strings, the sound was pure magic, warm and resonant, filling my small living room with something that felt like coming home. I'd always wanted to learn guitar, but never had the money for lessons or a decent instrument. My parents had made it clear early on that extras like music lessons were luxuries we couldn't afford, though somehow Madison's cheerleading camps and dance classes always seemed to fit in the budget. For 3 weeks, I taught myself to play using YouTube videos and library books. Every evening after work, I'd sit cross-legged on my living room floor, fingers raw from practicing chord progressions. The guitar became my sanctuary, my way of processing the loneliness I'd felt for so many years. When I played, I could forget about being the overlooked daughter, the sister who always came second. Christmas Eve, I decided to bring the guitar to my parents' house. I wanted to share this new part of myself with my family, maybe play a simple version of Silent Night after dinner. Mom had always complained that our family gatherings were too quiet, that we needed more life in our celebrations. I wrapped the guitar carefully and placed it under the tree alongside the other presents. Dad raised an eyebrow when he saw the size of my gift case. "What did you get us, Em?" "A surfboard," he joked, settling into his recliner with a beer. "It's something special," I said, unable to hide my excitement. "It is something I want to share with all of you." Madison bounced over in her new Christmas pajamas. "Yes." Mom had gotten her a special Christmas Eve outfit while I wore the same red sweater I'd had for 4 years. "Ooh, mysterious," Madison squealed. "Can I shake it?" "Better not," I laughed. "It's fragile." That evening, we followed our usual Christmas Eve routine. Mom made her famous sugar cookies. Dad complained about the Christmas movies Madison insisted on watching, and I helped with dishes while Madison painted her nails on the couch. Normal, familiar. I went to bed in my old childhood room feeling hopeful about the morning. Christmas morning started like every other year. Coffee and cinnamon rolls, then the slow ritual of present opening. Madison went first, as always, squealing over each gift like it was a treasure. New boots from Mom, a designer purse from Dad, jewelry from various aunts and uncles. The pile of wrapping paper around her grew mountainous. My turn came last. A few practical gifts, a coffee maker for my apartment, some books, a gift card to Target. Nice gestures, but nothing that felt particularly personal or thoughtful. Then Dad handed me my guitar case. "This one's from you to all of us. Right, sweetheart," he said with a wink. My heart started racing as I unzipped the case. The guitar was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper, and what looked like a receipt. My hands were shaking as I picked up the note, written in Mom's handwriting. Emily, we hope you understand. Madison's winter formal is next week, and she needed a dress. The music store downtown gave us $800 for the guitar. We used it to buy her the beautiful blue dress she's been wanting from Nordstrom. We know you'd want to help your sister look her best. Love, Mom and Dad. The room went silent, except for the crackling of wrapping paper and the distant sound of neighborhood kids playing with their new Christmas toys outside. I stared at the receipt, $800 from Murphy's Music Exchange, dated December 23rd. Yesterday. You sold my guitar, I whispered. Madison looked confused, glancing between me and our parents. What guitar? The one I brought here yesterday? I said, my voice getting stronger. The one that belonged to Sarah's grandmother. The one I've been learning to play for 3 weeks. Mom sighed, that familiar sound she made when she thought I was being dramatic. Emily, honey, you don't even know how to play guitar. Madison has a formal next Friday, and you know how important these social events are for a girl her age. I was learning to play. The words came out louder than I intended. That guitar was a gift from my best friend. It belonged to her grandmother who died 2 years ago. It wasn't mine to sell. Dad set down his coffee mug with a heavy thud. Now hold on, young lady. You brought it into our house, put it under our tree. We assumed it was a family gift. A family gift. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was in a guitar case, Dad. What family gift comes in a guitar case? Madison finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. I didn't know. I thought you'd bought me something music-related. I didn't ask them to sell anything. But even as she said it, I could see the relief in her eyes. She'd gotten her dress, and that's what mattered to her. Hi, it's Emily, Mom said in that patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years. You're 28 years old. You live on your own. You have your own income. Madison is still in college, still figuring out her life. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for family. Sacrifices? I stood up so fast the empty guitar case fell to the floor. When have any of you ever made a sacrifice for me? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighborhood sounds seemed to fade away. My parents looked at each other with that expression I knew so well. The look that said I was being unreasonable, oversensitive, dramatic. 28 years of being the responsible one, the overlooked one, the one who was expected to understand and sacrifice and smile through it all, came crashing down on me in that moment. Every time Madison got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the first choice of everything. Every time I was told to be understanding, to be mature, to put family first while family never seemed to put me first. I need some air, I managed to say, grabbing my coat from the hallway closet. Emily, don't be like this, Mom called after me. It's Christmas morning, but I was already out the door, walking down the familiar street where I'd grown up, past the houses of neighbors who were probably having normal Christmas mornings with their families, families where parents didn't sell their children's treasured possessions to buy party dresses. The winter air was sharp against my face, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating atmosphere back in that living room. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I could think of who might understand. Sarah, it's Emily. I know you're probably busy with your family, but they sold it. My parents sold your grandmother's guitar. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. They what? As I explained what had happened, walking aimlessly through my childhood neighborhood, Sarah's silence grew heavier. Emily, I am so sorry. That guitar, it wasn't just an instrument. It was Mrs. Chen's most prized possession. She played it at my grandfather's funeral, at my parents' anniversary party, at every important moment in our family. I know, I whispered, stopping in front of the park where Sarah and I used to swing as kids. I know, and now it's gone, and I don't even know who has it. We're going to get it back, Sarah said firmly. I'm calling the music store as soon as they open tomorrow. This is not over. After we hung up, I stood there in the empty park, watching the swings move gently in the cold December breeze. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly alone. Not just lonely, I'd been lonely for years, but alone in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about family, about love, about my place in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Please come back. Mom made pancakes, as if pancakes could fix what had just been broken. I was about to head back to my apartment when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Miss Emily, you all right? I turned to see James Carter walking toward me, a concerned expression on his weathered face. James had been driving for my family on and off for the past 5 years. mainly taking my grandmother to doctor's appointments before she passed, and occasionally driving Madison to events when she needed to look sophisticated, according to Mom. James was probably in his 60s, a tall, lean black man with gentle eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. He lived in the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, just a few blocks over, and I'd always felt comfortable with him. Unlike most adults in my childhood, James had always actually listened when I talked. "Oh, hi, James," I said, wiping at my eyes. "What are you doing in the neighborhood?" "Visiting my sister for Christmas morning," he said, gesturing toward a house across the street. "Saw you standing here looking like the world just fell down around you. Want to talk about it?" Something about his voice, kind but not pitying, concerned but not intrusive, made me want to tell him everything. So I did. James listened without interrupting as I told him about the guitar, about Sarah's grandmother, about walking into that living room to find my most precious possession had been sold like it was nothing more than an old piece of furniture at a garage sale. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his breath visible in small puffs in the cold air. "That guitar meant something to you," he said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Everything," I whispered. "It was the first thing in years that felt like it was truly mine. Not something hand-me-down from Madison, not something practical that Mom picked out because it was on sale. It was mine, and it was beautiful, and for 3 weeks I felt like maybe I had found something I could be good at." James nodded slowly. Music has a way of speaking to people who've been quiet too long. Something about the way he said it made me look at him more closely. In all the years he'd worked for my family, I'd never really thought about James as a person with his own story, his own dreams. He was just the reliable man who showed up on time, drove carefully, and never complained when my parents changed plans at the last minute. "James, can I ask you something?" "Course you can, Miss Emily. Do you think I'm being selfish? Mom and Dad keep saying family comes first, that Madison needed that dress more than I needed some old guitar." James was quiet for so long, I thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Miss Emily, I've been watching your family for 5 years now, driving your grandmother to her appointments, taking Madison to her events, sometimes picking you up when your car was in the shop. You want to know what I've noticed?" I nodded. "I've never once seen anyone in your family ask what you needed. Not once. It's always been about what Madison needs, what your parents want, what would make everyone else happy. But you just smile and go along with it, like your feelings don't count." His words hit me like a physical blow, partly because they were true, and partly because I'd never heard anyone else acknowledge what I'd felt my entire life. "But they're my family," I said weakly. "A family is supposed to come first. Family is supposed to take care of each other," James corrected gently. "All of each other, not just the loudest one, or the youngest one, or the one who demands the most attention. All of them." We started walking together, our footsteps crunching on the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. The Christmas decorations on all the houses looked cheerful and warm, but I felt disconnected from all that holiday joy, like I was watching it through glass. "My grandmother used to say something when I was growing up," James continued. "She said some people are givers, and some people are takers, and the takers will keep taking until the givers learn to say no. I don't know how to say no to them," I admitted. "Every time I try to stand up for myself, they make me feel like I'm being selfish or dramatic." "That's because they benefit from you not saying no," James said simply. "Makes their lives easier when you just go along with whatever they decide." We'd reached the corner where James would turn toward his sister's house, but he didn't seem in any hurry to leave. Instead, he stopped walking and turned to face me. "Miss Emily, can I tell you something?" Something I probably should have said years ago. There was something in his tone that made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. "What is it?" "Your grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy Johnson, your daddy's mother. She used to talk to me during those car rides to her doctor appointments. Talked about you a lot." I felt a pang of grief at the mention of Grandma Dorothy. She'd died 3 years ago, and I still missed her terribly. She was the one person in my family who had always seemed to really see me, who remembered my birthday without being reminded, and who asked about my job like she actually cared about the answer. "She was worried about you," James continued. "Said she could see how hard you tried to make everyone happy, how you always put yourself last. She used to say it broke her heart, watching you disappear a little more every year." Tears started flowing down my cheeks again, but these felt different from the angry tears I'd cried earlier. These felt like grief for something I'd lost without even realizing it was gone. "She wanted to do something about it," James said quietly. Before she passed, she made some arrangements. Legal arrangements. I stared at him, confused. What kind of arrangements? James looked around the empty street, then back at me. This isn't the place for this conversation. Too cold, too public. But Miss Emily, there are things you need to know. Things about your grandmother's will, about what she left behind. I was at the reading of the will, I said, wiping my nose with the back of my glove. She left everything to Dad. The house, her savings, everything. She left everything she could legally leave to your father. Yes, James said carefully. But there were other things. Things she set up differently, with different lawyers, because she knew your parents would never let you have them if they knew about them. My heart started pounding. What are you talking about? I can't explain it all out here in the cold, James said, glancing at his watch. But I can show you. Tomorrow, if you want. I have some documents your grandmother asked me to keep safe, told me to give to you when the time was right. Why didn't you give them to me when she died? James's expression grew sad. Because she made me promise to wait until you were ready to hear the truth about some things, until you were ready to stand up for yourself. And Miss Emily, seeing you out here in this park on Christmas morning, finally angry about how you've been treated. I think that time has come. I felt dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. What truth? What documents? Tomorrow, James said firmly but kindly. This is too important to rush through in a parking lot conversation. You go home, get warm. Think about whether you really want to know what your grandmother discovered about your family, because once you know, Miss Emily, you can't unknow it, and it's going to change everything. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, plain white, with just his name and phone number printed in simple black letters. You call me when you're ready, he said, pressing the card into my gloved hand. But don't wait too long. Some secrets have been buried long enough. With that, he walked away, leaving me standing alone in the park with 1,000 questions buzzing in my head. What had Grandma Dorothy discovered? What documents was James talking about? And why did I suddenly feel like my entire life had been built on lies I didn't even know existed? I walked slowly back toward my parents' house, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at James's business card and thinking about everything he'd said. Through the front window, I could see my family in the living room. Madison modeling what looked like a new outfit, probably the dress they'd bought with the money from my guitar, while Mom and Dad smiled and took pictures. They looked happy, complete, like nothing was missing, like I was missing, and nobody had even noticed. I started my car and drove home to my apartment, leaving my family to their perfect Christmas morning. But James's words kept echoing in my mind. Some secrets have been buried long enough. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandma Dorothy's face, remembered the way she used to look at me with such sadness in her eyes during those last months of her life. She'd tried to tell me something several times. I realized now. Always started sentences with, "Emily, there's something you should know." But then Madison would burst into the room, or Mom would need something, and the moment would be lost. Had she been trying to tell me about whatever James was talking about? I spent Christmas night going through old photo albums, looking for clues I might have missed. Pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays. In almost every photo, I noticed the same pattern. Madison in the center, bright and smiling, surrounded by attention. Me on the edges, usually helping with something, often partially cut out of the frame. But in the photos with Grandma Dorothy, it was different. In those pictures, she was always touching me somehow, a hand on my shoulder, an arm around my waist, her fingers gently stroking my hair, like she was trying to hold on to me, to keep me from floating away. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't concentrate on graphic design projects when my entire world felt like it was about to be turned upside down. At 10 a.m., I called the number on James's card. "James Carter," he answered on the second ring. "It's Emily," I said. "I'm ready. I need to know what my grandmother wanted me to know." There was a pause. Then, "I'll pick you up at noon. Wear something warm. We're going to need to drive somewhere private to talk about this." "Where are we going?" "To see what your grandmother left for you," James said. "The real inheritance she wanted you to have." At exactly noon, James pulled up in front of my apartment building in an old but well-maintained Honda Civic. I'd expected him to be driving one of the luxury cars my parents rented him for special occasions. But of course, this was his personal vehicle, his real life outside of the services he provided for families like mine. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked as I got into the passenger seat. And once we start down this road, there's no going back to the way things were. I thought about the empty guitar case in my apartment, about the receipt for $800 that represented everything wrong with my family dynamics, about 28 years of feeling invisible in my own life. "I'm sure," I said. James nodded and put the car in drive. "Then let's go see what Dorothy Johnson really wanted her granddaughter to know." We drove in comfortable silence for about 20 minutes, heading toward the outskirts of Reno where the houses grew farther apart, and the landscape opened up into desert hills dotted with sagebrush. I'd lived in this city my entire life, but James was taking me to a part of town I'd never really explored. Finally, he turned down a gravel road that led to a small storage facility, the kind of place with rows of identical metal units protected by chain-link fencing. James pulled up to Unit 47 and turned off the engine. "This is where we're going?" I asked, confused. "Your grandmother rented this unit 5 years ago," James explained, pulling a key from his pocket. "Paid for 10 years in advance. She asked me to be the secondary contact, said when the time came, I'd know what to do with what's inside." My hands were shaking as we walked toward the metal door. James inserted the key and rolled up the door with a loud metallic screech that echoed across the empty facility. Inside was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of old furniture or boxes of junk, the unit was clean and organized. There was a small desk with a lamp, a comfortable chair, and several filing cabinets along one wall. But what caught my attention immediately was what dominated the center of the space: an upright piano, old but beautiful, with sheet music scattered across the top. "She used to come here," James said quietly, "every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years, until she got too sick to drive. Said it was the only place she could think clearly." I walked over to the piano and ran my fingers across the keys. The sound was slightly out of tune but still rich and warm. On top of the piano was a framed photograph I'd never seen before. Grandma Dorothy as a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, sitting at the same piano with a huge smile on her face. "James, I don't understand. Why did she need a place to think clearly?" "She lived alone after Grandpa died." James moved to one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Because she discovered some things about your family that she couldn't process at home. Things that made her question everything she thought she knew about her own son." He handed me the folder, and I saw my name written across the front in Grandma Dorothy's familiar handwriting. "For Emily, the truth about your family." "Before you open that," James said, settling into the chair beside the desk, "let me tell you how this all started. About 4 years ago, your grandmother asked me to drive her to a lawyer's office downtown. Not the family lawyer your parents use, a different one. She said she needed to make some inquiries about financial records, about things that had been bothering her for a long time." I sat down on the piano bench, still holding the unopened folder. "What kind of things?" "She'd started noticing patterns in how your parents treated you compared to Madison. But more than that, she'd started wondering about money. About why your family was always struggling financially when your father had a decent job, and why there never seemed to be money for things you needed, but always seemed to be money for Madison's activities." A cold feeling was settling in my stomach. "What did she find?" "Open the folder, Miss Emily. The first document will explain better than I can." With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. The first page was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting, dated just 6 months before she died. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, it means James has decided you're finally ready to know the truth about some things that have been weighing on my heart. I pray you'll forgive an old woman for not having the courage to tell you these things while I was alive, but I was afraid of what it would do to our family. Afraid of how much it would hurt you. But watching you disappear a little more each year, watching you accept being treated as less important than your sister, has convinced me that sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living a lie. Emily, you are not your parents' biological daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped and nearly dropped the folder. "What?" I whispered. James's voice was gentle but firm. "Keep reading, honey. She explains everything." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper steady, but I forced myself to continue reading. "You were adopted when you were 6 months old. Your biological mother was my daughter-in-law's younger sister, Rebecca. She was only 17 when she got pregnant, and the father was not in the picture. Your parents, Stephen and Karen, had been trying to have a baby for 3 years with no success. When Rebecca realized she couldn't keep you, Karen begged to adopt you as their own. The adoption was supposed to be open, with Rebecca remaining part of your life, But when you were 2 years old, she was killed in a car accident. Karen was devastated. She had loved Rebecca like her own sister. But instead of honoring Rebecca's memory by telling you about her as you grew up, your parents decided it would be easier to let you believe you were their biological child. Then, when you were 8 years old, Karen got pregnant naturally with Madison. Emily, what I'm about to tell you is the hardest thing I've ever had to write. When Madison was born, everything changed in your household. You went from being their miracle baby to being, I don't know how to say this kindly, a reminder that they hadn't been able to conceive on their own. Madison became their real daughter, and you became the child they had settled for. I couldn't breathe. The storage unit felt like it was spinning around me. Adopted. I was adopted, and my parents had never told me. For 28 years, they had let me believe I was their biological daughter, while treating me like I was somehow less worthy of love than Madison. I need air, I gasped, stumbling toward the open door of the unit. James was beside me in seconds, his steady presence keeping me from collapsing entirely. Breathe, Miss Emily. Slow and deep. I know it's a shock. They never told me, I whispered when I could finally speak. 28 years, and they never told me I was adopted. Your grandmother struggled with that too, James said. She knew it was wrong, but she also knew that if she told you herself, it would destroy your relationship with your parents. What relationship? I laughed bitterly. The one where they sell my most precious possessions to buy party dresses for their real daughter. I walked back into the unit and picked up the letter, needing to know the rest of the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But Emily, there's more you need to know. Rebecca didn't just give you up for adoption. She left something for you. A trust fund, set up with money she inherited from her grandmother. It was meant to be yours when you turned 25, but your parents convinced the lawyer that they should manage it for your own good. Emily, that trust fund contained $50,000 when you turned 25. Today, it should be worth nearly $75,000 with interest. Your parents have been using that money for the past 3 years. Madison's car, her college tuition, her credit card bills. It's all been paid for with your money. I've included copies of all the bank statements and legal documents in this folder. I've also included contact information for Rebecca's family. Your biological grandmother and uncle are still alive, and they've been asking about you for years. They never stopped loving you, Emily, even though they respected the adoption agreement and stayed away. My darling granddaughter, I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but to free you. You have been living your entire life trying to earn love from people who decided long ago that you were worth less than their biological child. You have been sacrificing your dreams and your happiness for people who have been stealing from you, literally stealing your inheritance while making you feel guilty for asking for basic consideration. You deserve so much more than this. You deserve to know who you really are, where you really come from, and what is rightfully yours. There is one more envelope in this folder. A letter from your biological mother that she wrote for you before she died. I've saved it for last because I know it will be overwhelming. But she wanted you to know how much you were loved, even in the brief time she had with you. Be brave, my sweet girl. Be angry if you need to be. And most importantly, don't let them make you feel guilty for finally standing up for yourself. All my love, Grandma Dorothy Pete Thag, S. The piano was your biological mother's. Rebecca was incredibly talented and dreamed of becoming a music teacher. I bought it from her family after she died, hoping someday I could give it to you. Maybe now you'll understand why music called to you so strongly. It's in your blood. I sat there in stunned silence, the letter trembling in my hands. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity, all of it was a lie. I wasn't the biological daughter who somehow wasn't good enough. I was the adopted daughter who was never really given a fair chance to be part of the family. James, I said quietly, how long have you known? Your grandmother told me everything about 2 years ago, he admitted. She was planning to tell you herself, but then she got sick so fast. She made me promise to wait until you were ready to handle the truth. I thought about the guitar again, about how naturally music had come to me, how right it had felt in my hands. My biological mother had been musical. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was literally in my DNA. There's more in the folder, James said gently. The bank statements, the legal documents about the trust fund, contact information for your biological family. But maybe that's enough for today. I shook my head. No, I need to see it all. I need to see exactly how much they've taken from me. The bank statements were devastating. $50,000, gone in 3 years. Madison's brand new Honda Civic when she turned 18, $18,000. Her sorority fees and spring break trips, $12,000. Credit card bills for shopping sprees and dinners out, thousands more. My parents had been living beyond their means for years, and they'd been doing it with money that belonged to me, money that my teenage biological mother had wanted me to have, money that was meant to help me build a life, maybe go back to school, maybe start my own business. Instead, it had paid for the princess lifestyle of the daughter they actually wanted. "Miss Emily," James said carefully, "I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else your grandmother wanted me to tell you. She hired a lawyer before she died, not to take legal action, but to make sure you'd have options when you found out the truth." He pulled out another document from the folder. "The lawyer is still on retainer. Your grandmother left money specifically to pay for legal fees if you decide you want to recover what was stolen from you. It won't be easy, and it will probably destroy your relationship with your parents permanently, but it's possible." I stared at the document, my mind reeling. Sue my parents. Take them to court for stealing my inheritance. Force them to account for every dollar they'd spent of money that was meant to be mine. 2 days ago, the thought would have been unimaginable. But 2 days ago, I still thought they were my biological parents who just happened to prefer their younger daughter. Now I knew the truth. They were people who had taken in an unwanted baby, spent years making that child feel unwanted, and then stolen money that belonged to her to pamper their real daughter. "I need to think," I said finally. It's too much to process all at once." "Of course it is," James agreed. "But Miss Emily, don't let them guilt you into staying quiet about this. You've spent your whole life protecting their feelings while they trampled on yours. It's time to think about what you want, what you deserve." I looked around the storage unit one more time, at the piano that had belonged to my biological mother, at the documents that proved I had a whole other family who had loved me from afar, at the evidence of years of theft and deception. "James, can you do something for me? Anything. Can you drive me to Murphy's Music Exchange? I want to see if my guitar is still there. I want to buy it back." James smiled for the first time since we'd arrived at the storage unit. Now that sounds like someone who's ready to start fighting for what's hers. Murphy's Music Exchange was a small, cluttered shop downtown that I'd passed 100 times but never entered. The owner, a bearded man in his 50s named Dave, looked up from restringing a guitar when James and I walked in. "Help you folks with something. I'm looking for a specific guitar," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "A 1967 Martin D28. It was sold here 2 days ago." Dave's face lit up. "Oh, that beauty. Yeah, I remember that one. Gorgeous instrument, barely played. Some folks brought it in, said their daughter didn't need it anymore." He shook his head. "Shame, really. That guitar was meant to be played." My heart clenched at his casual description. Some folks brought it in, like it was just another transaction, not the destruction of something precious. "Is it still available?" I asked. "Actually, yeah, it's in the back. Had a couple people look at it, but the price point is pretty high for most of our usual customers. Want to see it?" When Dave brought out Sarah's grandmother's guitar, I had to bite back tears. It looked exactly the same. That warm, honey-colored body, the worn spots where Mrs. Chen's fingers had caressed the wood through decades of playing, but somehow it looked sadder, like it knew it had been abandoned. "How much?" I asked. "Well, I paid $800 for it, so I'm asking $1250, but for someone who really appreciates vintage Martins." He studied my face. "You're not just looking for any guitar, are you? This one means something to you." James stepped forward. "This young lady is the rightful owner of that instrument. It was sold without her knowledge or permission." Dave's expression shifted from friendly salesman to concerned citizen. "Oh, hell. That happens more than you'd think. Family members selling things that don't belong to them. You want to file a police report?" I thought about it. A police report would mean involving my parents officially, making this whole mess public. But looking at that guitar, remembering how it had felt in my hands, remembering Sarah's tears when she entrusted it to me, "No," I said, "I just want to buy it back." "Tell you what," Dave said, his voice gentle. $850. That's what I paid plus a small handling fee. Someone who cares about an instrument like this shouldn't have to pay full retail to get back what was stolen from them." I pulled out my credit card, hands shaking slightly. $850. Money I couldn't really afford on my graphic designer salary. Money I'd have to put on a card and pay off over months. But as I signed the receipt, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. the satisfaction of fighting for something that mattered to me. "She's all yours," Dave said, carefully placing the guitar back in its case. "And hey, if you ever want to trade her in for something else, you bring her back to me first, okay? I'll make sure she goes to someone who'll love her properly." Walking out of that music store with the guitar case in my hand, I felt like I was reclaiming more than just an instrument. I was reclaiming my right to have things that mattered to me, my right to make decisions about my own life. "Where to now?" James asked as we loaded the guitar into his car. I looked at my phone. It was only 2:30 p.m., but it felt like we'd lived through several lifetimes since morning. And I need to call Sarah. She needs to know I got her grandmother's guitar back. But first, I needed to do something else. Something I'd been avoiding since Christmas morning. "James, can you take me to my parents' house? There are some things I need to say." James studied my face carefully. "You sure you're ready for that conversation? They're going to deny everything. Try to make you feel guilty. Tell you you're being dramatic. Let them try," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I'm done protecting their feelings while they destroy mine." The drive to my childhood home felt different this time. Instead of the familiar anxiety I usually felt when dealing with my parents, I felt something else. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly where I stood with them. And more importantly, I understood that their treatment of me wasn't about my worth as a person. It was about their own guilt and selfishness. Dad's car was in the driveway, which meant they were both home. Good. I wanted to have this conversation with both of them present. "You want me to come in with you?" James asked. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to do alone." I walked up the familiar sidewalk, past the flower beds Mom always fussed over, past the porch where I'd spent countless childhood hours feeling like an outsider in my own family. But this time, I wasn't the confused, hurt little girl who just wanted to belong. I was a grown woman who finally understood the game that had been played with her life. I didn't knock. This had been my home once, and I still had my key. "Emily!" Mom looked up from the couch where she was folding laundry. Madison's laundry, I noticed. "Honey, we were so worried when you left yesterday. You missed Christmas dinner, and Madison felt terrible about the whole guitar thing." "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice calm. "In the kitchen, having some coffee." "Emily, sweetheart, sit down. Let's talk about this. We know you were upset, but..." "Mom," I cut her off. "Call Dad in here. We need to have a family meeting." Something in my tone must have warned her that this wasn't going to be a typical family discussion where I eventually apologized for being dramatic. She called for Dad, who appeared a moment later with his coffee mug and a slightly defensive expression. "Emily, if you're here to lecture us about that guitar again, I'm here to talk about my trust fund," I said simply. The change in both their faces was immediate and unmistakable. Mom went pale, and Dad's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "What trust fund?" Mom asked, but her voice was too high, too forced. "The $50,000 my biological mother left for me," I continued, watching their reactions. "The money you've been using to pay for Madison's car, her college, her credit cards, her entire lifestyle for the past 3 years." Dad set down his coffee mug with shaking hands. "Emily, I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything." I pulled out one of the bank statements from the folder James had given me. "Rebecca Martinez, my biological mother, set up a trust fund when she was 17 years old. It was supposed to come to me when I turned 25. Instead, you convinced the lawyer to let you manage it, and you've been stealing from me ever since." The silence in the room was deafening. Mom sank down onto the couch like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "How did you find out?" she whispered. "Grandma Dorothy left me documents, bank statements, legal paperwork, everything." I felt surprisingly calm, like I was discussing someone else's life. "She knew what you were doing, and she knew I deserved to know the truth." Dad tried to rally. "Now hold on, Emily. That money was being used for family expenses. Madison is still in college. Madison is not my responsibility," I said firmly. "That money was left to me by my biological mother. My biological mother who you never told me about. My biological mother who died in a car accident when I was 2 years old, and whose memory you completely erased from my life." Mom started crying. "Emily, we did what we thought was best. We loved you like our own daughter." "No, you didn't." The words came out harder than I intended, but they were true. "You loved me like a consolation prize. I was the child you settled for until you could have your own. And once Madison was born, I became the reminder that you weren't able to conceive naturally. That's not true, Dad protested. We never thought of you that way. Then why did everything change when Madison was born? Why did she get the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the first choice of everything? Why were there always money for her activities but never money for mine? Why did you sell my guitar without even asking me? Neither of them could answer that. I spent my entire childhood thinking there was something wrong with me, I continued, thinking that if I just tried harder, worked harder, asked for less, you would love me the way you loved Madison. But the problem was never with me. The problem was that you never dealt with your own guilt about taking in an unwanted baby, and then you took that guilt out on me. You weren't unwanted, Mom sobbed. We wanted you so badly. Then why didn't you tell me about Rebecca? Why didn't you honor her memory? Why did you let me grow up thinking I was just the daughter who wasn't good enough? Mom couldn't answer through her tears. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. And why, I said, pulling out more bank statements, did you think it was okay to steal $75,000 from me? Money that was supposed to help me build my own life, go back to school, maybe start my own business. Money that you spent on luxuries for Madison while I lived in a cramped apartment and worried about every grocery bill. We were going to pay it back, Dad said weakly. When? How? You're already struggling financially, and you keep spending more on Madison every semester. Were you planning to tell me about the trust fund eventually? Or were you just going to let me go my whole life, not knowing that my biological mother loved me enough to provide for my future? The questions hung in the air like accusations. And they were accusations, I realized. I was finally, after 28 years, holding my parents accountable for their choices. What do you want from us, Emily? Mom asked through her tears. It was a fair question. What did I want? An apology. The money back. For them to magically become the parents I'd always wished they were. I want you to stop lying to me, I said. I want you to acknowledge that you stole from me. And I want you to understand that your relationship with me has to change. What does that mean? Dad asked. It means I'm done being the family scapegoat. I'm done being the one who sacrifices so Madison can have everything she wants. I'm done pretending that the way you've treated me is normal or acceptable. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. I'm going to be in touch with a lawyer about the trust fund money. You can pay it back voluntarily, or we can settle it in court. But either way, I'm not going to let you keep stealing from me. Emily, please. Mom reached for my hand. Don't destroy our family over money. I pulled my hand away. You destroyed our family the day you decided I was worth less than Madison. The day you decided to erase my biological mother from my history. The day you decided to steal my inheritance. I'm just finally refusing to pretend everything is fine. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final thing I needed to say. And Mom, Dad, the next time Madison needs something expensive, don't call me asking for help. Find a way to pay for it with your own money, the way every other parent in the world does. I left them sitting in their living room, surrounded by the Christmas decorations that suddenly looked as fake and hollow as the family dynamic I'd finally escaped. Outside, James was waiting in his car, and I climbed into the passenger seat feeling lighter than I had in years. How did it go? He asked. Better than I expected, I said honestly. I think I'm finally ready to start living my own life. As we drove away from the house where I'd spent 28 years trying to earn love that was never freely given, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The peace that comes from finally understanding your own worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Mom is crying and won't tell me what happened. What's going on? For the first time in my life, I didn't immediately jump to protect Madison from the truth about our family. Instead, I typed back, ask Mom and Dad to tell you about my trust fund. Ask them to tell you about Rebecca Martinez. It's time you knew the truth about some things. Then I turned off my phone and let someone else deal with the fallout for once. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a real apartment with actual space and natural light, not the cramped studio I'd been living in for years, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, calling from Portland. Emily, how's the new place? I looked around at my living room, where my guitar, Rebecca's guitar, sat proudly on a stand next to the upright piano James had helped me move from the storage unit. The trust fund settlement had finally gone through, and for the first time in my adult life, I had financial breathing room. It's perfect, I told Sarah. I can actually practice music without worrying about bothering the neighbors. The legal process hadn't been easy. My parents had fought the settlement at first, claiming they'd use the money for family expenses. That benefited me too. But when their lawyer saw the bank statements showing Madison's car payments, sorority fees, and shopping sprees, he advised them to settle quickly and quietly. In the end, I recovered $62,000. Not the full amount they'd stolen, but enough to change my life completely. Enough to move into a decent apartment, pay off my credit cards, and start the online graphic design business I'd been dreaming about for years. More importantly, it was validation. Legal, official recognition that what they'd done to me was wrong. "How are things with your family?" Sarah asked gently. That was the complicated part. After our confrontation in December, my parents had gone through several stages: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, a grudging acceptance that our relationship had fundamentally changed. They no longer called expecting me to drop everything for family emergencies. They no longer assumed I'd contribute money for Madison's expenses. And they definitely no longer took my presence at family gatherings for granted. Madison had been the most surprising part of all this. After learning the truth about my adoption and the stolen money, she'd shown up at my apartment in tears. "Emily, I had no idea," she'd sobbed. "I swear I didn't know they were using your money. I would never have let them buy me all that stuff if I'd known." I'd wanted to stay angry at her. It would have been easier than processing the complicated mix of emotions I felt about my sister. But Madison was as much a victim of our parents' dysfunction as I was, just in a different way. She'd been raised to expect special treatment, to believe she was more important than me, without understanding the cruel dynamics that created that reality. "We're working on it," I told Sarah. "Madison and I are actually talking more now than we have in years. Real talking, not just surface-level family stuff. And your parents?" "We have dinner once a month," I said. "Neutral territory, Dutch treat. They're trying, I think, but it's hard to rebuild trust after 28 years of lies." What I didn't tell Sarah was that I'd started seeing a therapist to work through the complex grief of losing the family I'd thought I had and learning to build relationships with the family I actually had. It was messier and more painful than I'd expected, but also liberating in ways I couldn't have imagined. The biggest change in my life, though, wasn't about my adoptive family. It was about the biological family I'd discovered through Grandma Dorothy's documents. 2 weeks after the confrontation with my parents, I'd worked up the courage to call the phone number in Rebecca's file, the number for my biological grandmother, Elena Martinez. "Hola?" The voice that answered was warm and slightly accented. "Hi, this is Emily Johnson. I think you might be my biological grandmother." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard crying. "Mija," Elena whispered. "We have been waiting for this call for 28 years. Meeting Elena and my biological uncle Carlos had been like finding missing pieces of myself I hadn't even known were lost. Elena looked so much like me, it was startling. The same dark hair, the same brown eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. Carlos was a music teacher at a local elementary school, and when he heard I was learning guitar, his face lit up exactly the way mine did when I talked about music. Rebecca was so talented, Elena told me over dinner at her house in Sparks, a suburb just outside Reno, and she started playing piano when she was 4, guitar when she was 8. She was going to study music education at UNR before she got pregnant with me, and her life took a different path. "She loved you so much," Elena continued, showing me photo albums I'd never seen. Pictures of Rebecca during her pregnancy, glowing and happy despite being so young. Pictures of her, holding me as a tiny baby, gazing down with such love in her eyes it made my chest ache. "She used to sing to you every night, lullabies in Spanish and English." Carlos pulled out his own guitar and played some of the songs Rebecca used to sing. As he played, I felt something click into place inside me, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. This was where my love of music came from. This was why melody and rhythm felt like coming home. This was the missing piece of my identity I'd been searching for my entire life. "Or would you like to learn some of Rebecca's songs?" Carlos asked. That had been 3 months ago. Now, I spent every Sunday afternoon at Elena's house, learning about my biological mother through her music, her recipes, her family stories. Elena taught me to make Rebecca's favorite tamales. Carlos taught me to play Rebecca's favorite songs. And slowly, I was building a relationship with the family who had loved me from a distance for nearly 3 decades. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "How's the new apartment? Ready for your first real housewarming party? James had become one of the most important people in my life over the past few months, not just because he'd delivered the truth about my family, but because he'd become the kind of steady, supportive presence I'd never had before. He was like the father figure I'd always wished for, someone who listened without judgment, who celebrated my victories without making them about himself, who offered practical advice without trying to control my decisions. "Almost ready," I texted back. "Just need to figure out what to cook for 10 people. Elena's tamales," he suggested. I smiled. James had met my biological family last month, and he and Elena had hit it off immediately. She kept trying to set him up with her neighbor's sister, insisting that a man who looked after other people's children deserved some looking after himself. The housewarming party was scheduled for Saturday, a small gathering of the people who had become my chosen family. Sarah was flying in from Portland. Elena and Carlos would be there. James, of course. My therapist had suggested I invite Madison, as a way of building our new relationship on more solid ground. And, after much consideration, I'd decided to invite my parents too. Not because I'd forgiven everything, but because I was learning to separate accountability from permanent punishment. They'd done terrible things, but they were also trying to make amends in their imperfect way. Mom had started therapy of her own, trying to understand why she'd treated me so differently from Madison. Dad had gotten a second job to help pay back the settlement money faster than the court-ordered schedule required. It didn't fix the past, but it was something. The day of the party, I woke up in my sunny bedroom and lay there for a few minutes just appreciating the quiet. My own space, paid for with my own money that was rightfully mine. On the nightstand was a framed photo Elena had given me, Rebecca holding baby me, both of us surrounded by family members I was just getting to know. I got up and made coffee. Real coffee, not the cheap stuff I'd been buying for years, and sat at my kitchen table with my guitar. This had become my morning ritual, coffee and music before the day officially began. Sometimes I played Rebecca's songs. Sometimes I worked on pieces I was composing myself. I'd started taking actual lessons from Carlos, and for the first time in my life, I was allowing myself to dream about what I might be able to accomplish if I really dedicated myself to music. My graphic design business was doing well enough that I'd been able to cut back to part-time client work. The rest of my time was spent exploring the creative pursuits I'd never allowed myself to prioritize. Music, yes, but also poetry, photography, even some experimental digital art that combined all my interests. For the first time in my adult life, I was living instead of just surviving. Around noon, people started arriving for the party. Sarah was first, rushing in with her arms full of flowers and wine, squealing about how amazing the apartment looked. Elena arrived with enough food for 20 people, despite my protests that it was only a small gathering. Carlos brought his guitar and immediately started playing with mine, creating beautiful harmonies that filled the apartment with warmth. James arrived with a housewarming gift that made me tear up, a professional guitar stand with a small brass plaque engraved, "For Emily, may your music fill every room." Madison came alone, which surprised me. She'd been dating someone seriously, but she said she wanted to focus on our relationship today. She said, pulling me aside while the others were settling in. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I need to say something." I braced myself. Madison and I had had several difficult conversations over the past few months, working through years of misunderstanding and resentment. "I know I benefited from the way Mom and Dad treated us differently," she continued. "I know I got opportunities and attention that should have been shared more equally. And I know I didn't speak up when I should have, even when I could see they were being unfair to you." This was new. Madison had acknowledged the financial theft and the lies about my adoption, but she'd never taken responsibility for the broader pattern of favoritism. "I was scared," she admitted. "I was scared that if I stood up for you, they'd stop loving me the way they loved me. But that was cowardly, and I'm sorry." I hugged my sister, really hugged her. Not one of those perfunctory family gathering hugs we'd been exchanging for years. "We were both just kids trying to survive in a messed up situation," I said. "The important thing is that we're figuring out how to have a real relationship now." My parents arrived last, looking nervous and carrying a gift bag. They'd been walking on eggshells around me since the settlement, clearly unsure how to interact with the daughter who was no longer willing to absorb their guilt and dysfunction. "Emily," Mom said, hesitating in the doorway, "your apartment is beautiful." "Thank you," I said simply. "Come in, meet everyone." Watching my two families, adoptive and biological, interact was surreal, but surprisingly natural. Elena immediately took Mom under her wing, complimenting her on raising such a strong, talented daughter. Carlos and Dad bonded over their mutual love of old Western movies. James, as always, was the steady presence who made everyone feel comfortable. At one point, while Carlos and I were playing music for the group, I caught Mom wiping away tears. "What's wrong?" I asked during a break between songs. "Nothing's wrong," she said. I never saw you like this before. So confident, so happy. And I'm realizing how much I contributed to you not feeling like you could be this person around us." It was the closest she'd come to a real apology, and I appreciated the acknowledgement. "I'm still the same person, Mom," I said gently. "I just finally have space to be myself." As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Sarah pulled me onto the balcony for a private moment. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "When I gave you Grandma Chen's guitar, I hoped it would bring you joy. I never imagined it would change your entire life." I looked through the sliding glass door at the apartment full of people who had become my chosen family, at the guitar that had started this whole journey, at the evidence of a life I'd built on my own terms. "It's funny," I said, "that if my parents hadn't sold the guitar, I might never have found out the truth about my adoption, or the stolen money, or my biological family. In trying to hurt me, they accidentally set me free." Sarah smiled. "Maybe that's the real gift your grandmother Chen wanted to give you. Not just the music, but the courage to fight for what matters to you." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the dishes, my phone rang. It was Elena. "Mija, I wanted to tell you again how wonderful tonight was. Seeing you so happy, so surrounded by people who love you. It's what Rebecca would have wanted for you. Thank you for coming," I said. "And thank you for welcoming me into the family. I know it's complicated having me show up after all these years. Emily," Elena's voice was firm but loving, "you were never not part of this family. We just had to wait for you to find your way back to us." After we hung up, I sat in my living room with my guitar, playing some of the lullabies Carlos had taught me, the songs my biological mother used to sing to me as a baby. The music filled the space around me, warm and comforting, like an embrace from someone I'd never gotten to know, but who had loved me completely. At 28, I was finally living the life I was supposed to have, not the life my adoptive parents had mapped out for me, where I existed to make everyone else comfortable, not the life I'd stumbled into as a young adult, just trying to survive on my own, but the life I chose, filled with music and creativity and relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. I thought about the scared, angry woman who had stood in a park on Christmas morning, devastated by her family's betrayal. She couldn't have imagined this apartment, this chosen family, this sense of peace and purpose. But she had started the journey by refusing to accept that being treated poorly was normal or acceptable. She had finally gotten angry enough to demand better, and in demanding better, she had discovered that she deserved everything she'd been afraid to ask for her entire life: love without conditions, respect without having to earn it, and the freedom to become whoever she was meant to be. My phone buzzed one more time, a text from Madison. "Thanks for including me tonight. I love seeing you happy. Can we have coffee next week? I want to hear more about the songs Carlos taught you." I smiled and typed back, "I'd love that. And Madison, maybe it's time I taught you some of them too. Music is meant to be shared." As I got ready for bed that night, I walked past the mirror in my hallway and caught sight of myself. I looked different than I had 6 months ago, not just because I was healthier and less stressed, but because I carried myself differently, like someone who knew her own worth, like someone who belonged in her own life. The guitar sat silently in the living room, gleaming in the moonlight that streamed through the windows. Tomorrow, I would play it again. I would continue building my business, strengthening my relationships, exploring the creative possibilities that finally felt within reach. But tonight, I was simply grateful for the courage to fight for what mattered, for the people who had supported me through the hardest transformation of my life, and for the biological mother I'd never met, but who had given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that I was loved, even before I was born, by someone who wanted the very best for my future. The trust fund money had been important. It had given me financial freedom and legal validation. But the real inheritance Rebecca had left me wasn't money. It was music, and resilience, and the unshakable certainty that I deserved to be loved for exactly who I was. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.